Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. Today is Wednesday the 16th of March 2022, and in this programme today we will be discussing a potential new announcement on behalf of the Biden administration and a revival of the old Iran agreement from 2015, but this time it's worse, as we see that the Biden administration has capitulated to Iran's nuclear demands. In doing so is endangering Israel and the Middle East. And of course tonight is Purim, when the Jewish people remember how God delivered them from the wicked and evil scheme of Haman, who tried to ethnically cleanse the Jewish people from the ancient empire that was Persia, which is modern day Iran. So this is tonight's topic. Reagan, it's good to see you. Well, it was a little bit of doubt whether you'd be here or not, but congratulations, or mazel tov on the birth of your new baby girl, Ariel.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. She is a treasure. I was just at the hospital a little bit before catching the train down here, and she's doing okay. Hopefully she and Rachel will be able to return home tomorrow. And thank you all for your well wishes, prayers, and the love that you've shown.
Yeah. And can you share it with our viewers what Ariel means?
Oh yeah, so so Ariel is a Hebrew name. It means Lion of God, and Rachel, my wife, is from Jerusalem. The lion is a symbol of the city of Jerusalem, so there's a lot of meaning behind that. Her middle name is Anastase, which is also, it means resurrection. And so if you go to Acts 17 and you see Paul talking with the philosophers in Athens, he's preaching Jesus and the resurrection, and they were so used to there being so many gods, they thought this is Jesus and his consort, or some female goddess. And he's like, no, this is the resurrection. Resurrection actually happened with this one Jesus. So Ariel Anastase is her name.
Fantastic. So congratulations. I'm so pleased for both of you and also Rachel as well. I mean, tonight's headline, the world is pretty much dominated by what's happening in the Ukraine with this Russian invasion. The world's focus is very much on the situation in Ukraine. And of course, when that happens, we see that other major key strategic developments are taking place, and it's almost getting zero press coverage. And this is the case with this potential new Iran agreement that the Biden administration is coming out with, that is absolutely horrific, and that's why we're discussing it today. But also what we've seen as well is that for months now, the US negotiating team have been negotiating in Vienna and working with the Russians to get an agreement with the Iranians. And it seems like the Biden administration just wants to totally surrender and capitulate to the Iranian regime. Every demand that the regime is asking, they're giving it to the Iranians, plus also 90 billion in US sanctions relief immediately, and of course then a payment of between 50 and 55 billion US dollars into their coffers as well, which is only going to increase their support for international terrorism in the Middle East and around the world, in endangering Israel, empowering the most vile, evil terrorist organizations, and the world is becoming a more dangerous place. So when is this Biden administration going to learn the realities of the world in which we're living in?
When we look at this chaotic world, it's very easy to isolate situations, and we can, as we have done, talk about set situations like Russia and Ukraine without realizing there's so many other political strands and threads that are even linked to that. So arguably, you can make the case for the US and its involvement or lack of involvement and lack of willingness to do certain things in the Ukraine-Russia situation. You can link that to, okay, well, they're actually working with Russia in a couple of ways, but primarily in trying to resolve this nuclear deal, which itself, as we're speaking of this evening, is a catastrophe. The original Iran deal in 2015 was bad enough. And then we saw that President Trump pulled the United States out of any deal there in 2016. It's very good moves.
2018, that was.
2018, sorry. Solid move to do that. We saw at the time Mike Pompeo gave set conditions. He gave a good solid list of 12 conditions for reaching some sort of agreement with Iran. And these, you can look at them and you think, well, these are perfectly humane, perfectly reasonable conditions. Declaration to a governing body prior to their military dimensions in regard to their nuclear testing, the ceasing of and abandoning of the development of nuclear weapons. That's included access of governing investigative bodies to all sites, release of U.S. citizens and allies, end to terror support, the respect of Iraq's national sovereignty, end of support for the rebels in the Yemen conflict that's ongoing, a few other things, but all of it very much about de-escalation, retreat from conflict in Syria, Yemen, and support of these terror organizations, and the end of developing nuclear weapons and processing of things like plutonium, which are incredibly dangerous. But what obviously we saw was Iran is not willing to do any of that. So the question, Simon, I guess that we have to ask as well, the question we're asking this evening follows on from that, and is very, very simply, are Western leaders oblivious to the Iranian nuclear threat? Is Biden and his administration capitulating to Iran's nuclear demands in this new deal? Viewers, that's your question this evening. We are live, we are interactive. Please be sending in your thoughts. But Simon, those conditions that Mike Pompeo gave, is Biden and co., are they kind of operating on the same basis?
Well, everything that Biden has done and everything his administration done has been in a complete reversal to President Trump's policy. So if President Trump announced a certain policy, then the Biden administration would do the exact opposite. So this is what they're very keen to do, is revive this Iran deal. And apparently, according to the details, this would actually only prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons for 9 years, allegedly. But Iran hasn't adhered to any of the international agreements regarding this anyway. They didn't even sign the last agreement, so I don't know how they're going to sign this agreement. But one thing is worrying, though. This is what the Biden administration has capitulated on. So the US has agreed to remove sanctions against Iranian terror operatives, Iranian military institutions, individuals involved in its missile programs and weapons of destruction, and also terror organizations. There's even reports how that the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps has been prescribed as a terror organization, and it's on the US State Department's terror list. That has now been removed. And also sanctions placed on the Supreme Leader Khomeini, the President of Iran, and the leading figures within the regime. Those sanctions have been lifted. And for what? I mean, has Iran changed its behavior? Has it changed its spots? No, it continues to be a menace. It even attacked a few days ago a US base in Erbil in northern Iraq. Yeah. And it's becoming more and more dangerous. So the more money this regime gets, the more it's going to continue its support for terrorism, the likes of Hamas, Hezbollah, and it's going to make the Middle East and the world an even more dangerous place.
They have pledged to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. They make routine threats to United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia as well. Remember, there are different strands of Islam. And these were requirements also originally that Pompeo gave a few years back now, to reaching any agreement or any deal or any removal of these sanctions. And now that's been rubbished as well. We have gone in to this negotiating table with no negotiation. There's no bartering. We are simply giving tens of millions, billions, tens of billions of US dollars over to a terror supporting group.
90 billion in sanctions relief is absolutely outrageous. And you're not going to know about this on our mainstream media or news because they don't actually want to know what is actually going on with this agreement.
Thank you all for your well wishes to both my daughter. Really appreciate the lovely messages. I have read them all. Thank you. We continue to ask this question. I'm keen to hear from you viewers what you think the danger is of this Iran deal that Simon and I are discussing this evening. What threat does it pose to peace in the Middle East? What threat does it pose to the nation state of Israel? What is Biden thinking? Send in your thoughts. I know many of you will have ideas, and I'm keen to hear and to read out some of those.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at this excellent CBN News report by Chris Mitchell that looks into this potential new Iran deal and the consequences of what could happen next.
After 11 months of negotiations, Israel's chief takeaway is alarm.
We look to Vienna and we're deeply troubled by what we see. For Israel and all the stability-seeking forces in the Middle East, the emerging deal, as it seems, is highly likely to create a more violent, more volatile Middle East.
They said that they were going to get a longer and stronger deal. This deal will be shorter and weaker.
Just days before an expected announcement, former State Department advisor on Iran, Gabriel Noronha, released information provided to him by current State Department officials.
My former colleagues I worked with, who are really so distressed by what they were seeing that they asked me to go public with these details because they said that Congress had not been informed and the American public hadn't been informed, and they were just so worried with the concessions that were being made by the negotiating teams that they felt that they needed to say something about it.
Noronha says the deal clears the way for a nuclear Iran.
Unfortunately, they're not getting any of the sunsets on Iran's nuclear restrictions lifted or extended. And so in only 9 years, Iran will have a clear path to a nuclear weapon. The American people need to know that this deal is illegal. It is dangerous to American national security. It's dangerous to the regional and global security in both the short term and in the long term.
Russia, a key player in these negotiations, wants written guarantees from the U.S. that sanctions from its war on Ukraine will not stop its trade with Iran. Israeli Prime Minister Bennett met with Putin on Saturday in Moscow about the war in Ukraine, although it's expected they discussed the nuclear deal and Russia's ongoing support for Iran. The deal would also reportedly provide billions in sanctions relief to Iran.
There are no restrictions in this deal on how that money will be spent and fueled to Iran's proxies. So we can expect that a lot is going to go to Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. And so we're going to really see over the next few years, it might take a few months to get going, we're going to see a rapid proliferation of terrorist activity. We're going to see more destabilizing activity, and we're going to see Iran's influence and power grow in the region.
That power represents an existential threat to Israel.
Let me be clear. Israel will not accept Iran as a nuclear threshold state. Israel will always maintain its freedom of action to defend itself.
Report there put together by Chris Mitchell. Now, there was an excellent article this week by Caroline Glick, writing for the Jewish News Syndicate. It was entitled, "Washington's Betrayal Has Only Just Begun, and now that the US President Joe Biden has agreed to an even more dangerous nuclear deal, Israel must be prepared to be a scapegoat." So thanks to Robin Benson, who actually sent me the article. It said that last week, a former State Department official and Iranian sanctions expert, Gabriel Normanna, posted details of a far-reaching concessions the Biden administration has already made with the Iranians in Vienna. Normanna wrote on his Twitter feed that he received the details of US concessions from members of the US delegation and members of a European delegation to the talks. He says that his former colleagues, who he refers to as career officers rather than political appointees, as he put it, are so concerned with the concessions being made by the US delegation, particularly its head, Robert Malley in Vienna, that they've said they've allowed him to publish some of the details of the coming deal in the hopes that Congress will act to stop this capitulation. He says 3 members of the US delegation, led by Malley's deputy, Richard Nephew, quit the talks a few weeks ago, also due to their convictions that Malley's capitulation to the Iranians endangers the United States of America.
There was another useful article, Simon, written by Melanie Phillips in the Times yesterday, and it's page 30 in yesterday's Times. She quite incisively notes that there's a discrepancy in how the U.S. is responding to Iran and how it's currently responding to Russia. So the U.S., she says, thinks that it can stop Russia by imposing sanctions, but counterintuitively believes that it can stop Iran by lifting sanctions. And she speaks of total capitulation. Here's some of the dangerous concessions that the U.S. seems prepared to make to Iran. Robert Malley, the U.S. envoy to Iran and the head of its negotiation team in Vienna, has full support of Biden and the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. He's already agreed to all of Iran's demands for the removal of sanctions against Iranian terror commanders and Iranian institutions and individuals involved in Iran's missile programs. The Biden administration has effectively surrendered to the Iranian regime to get a nuclear agreement in place with $90 billion in sanctions relief.
Get that immediately.
Right away. They're going to be able to sell their natural oil and gas with revenues of between 50 and 55 billion a year on top of that. So that's variable with rates for oil soaring and going up anyway. Who knows? I mean, could we see the U.S. buying oil from Iran now that it's saying it's not going to be buying any from Russia in the next little while? I mean, this is the nonsense that we're dealing with in our chaotic world, where we're saying, okay, we'll impose sanctions on this, but actually, let's go to this other aggressor, this other enemy. Remember, Iran was a big funder and a big provider of weaponry against insurgents in Iraq. Rather, 2 insurgents in Iraq against U.S. troops. We see their support for the Taliban as well, Al-Qaeda, all manner of terror groups it has some link to, and of course its special ops group, Al-Quds, very much a terror organization. That the U.S. has carried out assassination attacks on its commanders, even in the recent years that we've reported on that. They have conceded that the weapons of mass destructions program and terror operations, okay, well, we're not going to act as though those exist apparently anymore. We'd rather them not be developing nukes, but what's going on, Simon?
You kind of think, what kind of world are we living in?
Yeah.
Or what kind of world is the Biden administration living in? I mean, you've just seen the dangers now of what's happened when you've ignored Putin's invasion of Georgia, his invasion of Chechnya, his invasion of the Donbas region in Ukraine, as well as Chechnya. And now, of course, he's launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. You would have thought the Biden administration would have woken up to this. They would have woken up to the realities of the terrible strategic mistakes they made in Afghanistan last year with a disastrous US withdrawal. No, they're about to enter into the worst foreign policy decision that this administration has made so far. And let's not forget that Iran is the world's leading sponsor of international terrorism. They've been at war for the last 4 decades against Britain, against Israel, against the Sunni states, and of course the United States for the last over 40 years. They also have a ballistic missile program with the intention to fire rockets and missiles that can reach the continent of Europe, can reach Britain or even the United States. They are trying to create an Islamic crescent all the way across the entire Middle East and become the global power. And the ultimate goal, sadly, is the destruction of Israel, where their leaders have constantly said their ultimate desire is to destroy Israel. And yet the Biden administration is willing to give them 90 billion in sanctions relief, give them everything they want, and still allow them to have nuclear weapons. And to think that if we bring them out from the cold, we treat them nicely, then they're going to behave and everyone's going to love them. Well, this regime is evil, and you can't negotiate with evil. This is something we should have learned with Hitler in the 1930s. Well, clearly, the Biden administration hasn't learned those lessons, to our detriment.
Exactly. A couple of texts and an email here. Apparently, 2 Iranian assassins were sent to kill Mike Pompeo and another leading member of the Trump government. The Biden regime know who they are and refuse to act because of these negotiations.
Absolutely.
It's a strange situation. In says it's very worrying that this deal should happen on top of Brexit, COVID, and Ukraine. One wonders what is happening in this world now. God protect us all. Heather pitches in and indicates it seems that globalists are intent on plunging the world into World War III, and that and these actions seem to be very much a part of this attempt to throw everything into absolute economic chaos.
Well, going back to Ian's point, it's also interesting to note that it's actually, if a foreign power actually carries out a murder or an assassination against a US citizen on US soil, then that's a declaration of war. And clearly these IRGC commanders are sent by the Iranian regime to assassinate John Bolton, the former US security advisor, together with former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And if there is an assassination on US soil against these 2 great men of state, then that's a declaration of war. But the US Justice Department is saying, we have the evidence, we know who they are, we're not going to indict them because we're fearful that this could put off the Iranians from signing this agreement. I mean, this is total surrender of the West, and it's just absolutely weakness, and it's absolutely disgusting, and there's no understanding of what evil is. Before we go to our special guest today, I think it's also important to understand who the main architect is. In terms of who's negotiating on behalf of the Americans with the Iranian regime, because he's the brains of the operation. His name is Robert Malley, and he is the US envoy to Iran.
Robert Malley is known for radical positions favoring Iran, and he is completely hostile to Israel. He is not only leading the negotiations in Vienna, he's operating with the full support of Biden and Blinken, as we've already said. He's responsible for the entirety of the Biden administration's Middle Eastern policies. He's one of the lead negotiators on this current nuclear deal under Biden, but he's had history with this, Simon, hasn't he? He was there during the Obama administration, and he was also very much steering and leading in that process as well. But he's a controversial pick for the role of the U.S. envoy to Iran, widely criticized for his support for the Iranian regime. I mean, it just beggars belief. How could he be a supporter of the Iranian regime? And yet here we are. His appointment has indicated that the Biden administration would revert to Obama's approach, which is an approach of appeasement to Iran.
Absolutely. And also what's concerning as well, that the extreme left-winger Bernie Sanders has also endorsed him to take on that position. Now also, what's also interesting, just give you a bit of an update on who he is. So he is one of the lead negotiators on the Iran deal. And he was during the, as Reagan said, in the Obama administration. He was a controversial pick for the role of US envoy to Iran. Has been widely criticized for his support for the Iranian regime. We also find out as well that Malley is the son of an Egyptian Jewish journalist, Simon Malley, who lived in the US and France and was a champion in the 1950s, 60s and 70s of Third World liberation movements, including that of the Palestinians. The younger Malley served in the National Security Council during the Clinton administration, ending up with the title of Special Assistant to the President for Arab-Israeli Affairs. And after George W. Bush became president in 2001, Maley went to think tanks, becoming a program director for the Middle East and North African affairs at the International Crisis Group. We also then found that he had an unofficial relationship with Obama's campaign in 2008, but he had to. It was revealed that he held talks with Hamas representatives. So he's frozen out of the first part of the Obama administration. And then we see that Obama brought him into the National Security Council, first as an advisor to the president on the Middle East, North Africa and the Gulf, then as the council point for one man dealing with ISIS.
I think Senator Republican Tom Cotton, actually, Simon, from my home state, Arkansas, his words sum up Mali's attitude towards Iran and Israel. He said, it's deeply troubling that President Biden would consider appointing Rob Malley to direct Iran policy. Malley has a long track record of sympathy for the Iranian regime and animus towards Israel. The Ayatollahs wouldn't believe their luck if he is selected.
And they can't believe their luck now. So earlier today, I recorded via Zoom an interview with Dr. Harold Rode, who was a former advisor on Islamic affairs and also the Middle East to various US secretaries of defense in the Pentagon. And this is Dr. Harold Rode's view on this awful coming Iran deal that America has brokered. The world is preoccupied right now with Russia's terrible invasion of the Ukraine. We see that the Biden administration is carrying out negotiations with the Iranian regime in order to bring out to renew the Iran agreement of 2015. And by all accounts, this is 100 times worse than that agreement. What are your concerns regarding this potential new Iran agreement?
Simon, there's so many, I don't even know where to begin. It is a total capitulation of the United States to the Iranian terrorist regime that also oppresses its own people, the Iranian people. Now, let me make the following comment. This regime is a paper tiger, and without much effort, I think we could make it have problems, let's say. But we Americans have a problem in that when we are up against foreign evil forces, we say, oh my God, they're so strong and they're so powerful that, oh, we don't want to provoke them because if we do, horrible things are going to happen. I want to give you simply one example. Right before the Iraq War, a lot of the American bureaucracy and the press were concerned with what they called the elite Republican guards. And oh my God, they're really a force to be reckoned with. And we do that sort of thing over and over again. I'll tell you what was elite about the Republican guards. Number one, they were the most loyal to Saddam. How do we know that? Because they were mostly his relatives. Number two, they got better salaries and their equipment was a little better. But when the war started, there was no match. America and its allies, and the UK, of course, was one of them. We simply, the problem was that we were devastating them and we didn't want to kill all sorts of civilians. We don't want to kill anybody unnecessarily. But the strength and power of the United States was simply, they couldn't defeat us. And here we're doing the same thing with, oh my God, Iran, oh my God. Iran's a zero compared, this regime in Iran is a huge zero compared to the United States. And the truth is that with not much effort, we could very much keep them in their place and have them afraid of us. That's what the previous president of the United States was able to do. Under President Trump, they were petrified. And what was the proof? Their most important military leader, whose name was Qasem Soleimani, head of what is called the Quds Force, the Jerusalem Force, we eliminated. And the Iranians said, oh my God, oh my God, what are we going to do now? And we got to remember, I don't know whether it was Goethe, the German philosopher, or was it Churchill? I always get these people mixed up. I mean, that is, I don't get them. I know who they were different historically, but it's like the Iranians are either at your feet or at your throat. And our job is just to keep them at our feet. There is no middle ground. And this agreement, excuse me, this submission, and that's the right word, this surrender of the United States to, and who were we using as an intermediary? The Russians. Where do we get this idea that the Russians, mediator is usually neutral? Where do we get the idea that the Russians would be neutral between the Iranians and us? And even more dumb, when we realized that what the Iranians were doing, I can't remember just in the last few weeks what it was. We went to the Chinese, whom we knew were close to the Russians, and asked them to intervene to calm the Russians down. Well, the Chinese went right away and told the Russians that we're on to them and we know what they're doing. Why are we so stupid to believe that the Russians or the Chinese or anybody could be neutral, could be mediators? And it's nuts. But the people running the United States of America do not believe in the values of the founding fathers of the United States, which come from the values of Mount Sinai, the Old Testament. But the leaders are post-Americans, I want to say. Biden, I'm not even sure if, I don't think that he's capable of really making decisions. From what I understand on the Iran issue, the people calling the shots are the Secretary of State, Mr. Blinken, his deputy, Wendy Sherman, who in her past, she has a degree in social work. That's really gives her a lot of knowledge and able to deal with these things. And the other is Robert Malley. Robert Malley is head of the Iran negotiations team. I have met him once or twice when the time that I worked in the federal government. And I can only tell you, he's a very slick, sly, and awful, awful human being. And certainly, the three of them, what do they share in common? They don't believe in the values of the founding fathers of the United States. They see America as evil. How awful.
When it comes down to this potential new agreement that could be announced in a matter of days or weeks, Harold, it seems that the US administration has totally capitulated with this agreement, and it's far worse than the previous agreement signed in 2015. For example, instantly giving the Iranian regime $90 billion in sanctions relief, allowing them then to sell their natural gas and oil. They're taking a revenue of somewhere between 50 and 55 billion pounds per year. They also describe the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, from the State Department's terror list, and sanctions placed on commanders involved in Iran's mass weapons of mass destruction and missile program, as well as their terrorist proxies, will no longer face sanctions. The big question is, why would the Biden administration do this when we see how dangerous the world is right now when we look at Ukraine? And this will only endanger the peace and stability in the region and lead to more wars, if not more attacks on the nation of Israel.
I can only give you what I think. I don't know. Why do I say that? I'm not in touch really with the people making the decision-making authorities in the United States now. Myself and my friends have really almost no contact with anybody. And why? I can't answer. I can only say, since this is a religious-oriented program, religiously oriented, is this an attempt to, shall we say, with God's hand, to provoke the final war where all sorts of awful things will happen? Or maybe something else. You have the people who are running the state of Israel right now are by and large the leftists, who have believed that Israel, that the reason why America under Trump and some of the people before him is no longer bipartisan, and that is the Democratic Party has been so anti-Israel. And that doesn't mean everybody, because there's some great Democrats who are also pro-Israel. The reason was because Netanyahu, they said, was so pro-Trump. I'm not so sure about how true that is. And I think that President Trump and Ambassador Ron Dermer, the former ambassador of Israel to the United States, they went out of their way to bring in Democrats, but the Democrats didn't want to be brought in. So what has happened now with this new government in Israel, who wanted to prove that they could repair the relationship with the Democratic Party, they found that the exact opposite has happened. It is the Democratic regime here that has kowtowed, surrendered. The word in Persian is bested, and unfortunately has a very extremely negative thing of what the word besting means, and I'm going to leave that to everybody's imagination. What they find is Israel is alone now, and it does have allies again on the Iran issue, and that's the Saudis and the UAE and Bahrain. All of the leadership of every one of them is Sunni, and Iran is their mortal threat. All I can say is maybe God has put this in a context where Israel has to be grown-up children and make their own decisions. Israel is the one who's going to have to take care of this. Now, I'm not a military man, even though I worked for 28 years at the Pentagon. I'm a cultural and political analyst. That's what I spent my life doing, living in Iran. And I can only tell you that sorry, Simon, I lost my train of thought here.
No, just Karen Howard. Quickly, can you really explain really the treacherous nature of the Biden administration? Because according to Caroline Click's excellent article she writes for the Jewish News Syndicate, she says that the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps commanders are actively plotting to assassinate a former U.S. National Security Advisor,
Yes.
John Bolton,
Yes.
and former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and that the U.S. Justice Department knows their identity, has evidence to indict them, but won't, and feel that it could actually derail this agreement. I mean, how dangerous and how evil is this on behalf of the Biden administration?
It sounds to me like Chamberlain and the wonderful piece of paper he brought back that from signing the Munich agreement with Hitler. He's brought peace in our time. Oh my God, we have to have the agreement with the Iranians. Please understand that in the Middle East, in the Islamic world, written agreements mean nothing. And they are nothing more than they're so important to us that we want them to sign it on, then we can hold them to this. But we never hold the people to their agreements. We complain and they do all sorts of bad things. And that's the history that Iran has. If the Americans want them to sign, they'll sign, and they'll just pocket the concessions and they'll move on and take more. And we don't want to learn from history. We don't want to learn from our experience. And I want to make an argument which is uncomfortable, and that is that I am not so sure that the people who are involved in the Iran policy to say, I don't think they love America, but that's my opinion. I could be wrong. What you asked, Simon, about John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, both of whom were wonderful men, remarkable men, and love America and love what America stands for. And we choose to ignore it? Why? I mean, I can only say the people who are doing this just are not, seem to me, they're not loyal to the values of our founding fathers.
Harold, tonight is the Jewish festival of Purim, which is mentioned in the book of Esther, when we remember Haman's evil plan to ethnically cleanse the Jewish people from the entire ancient Persian Empire. What are the lessons that we can learn from the meaning of the festival Purim and from the book of Esther as it relates today to the Islamic Republic of Iran?
Well, the Iranians decided that is Haman, the evil Haman, the prime minister, the grand vizier, whatever of the Iranians, goes to the king Ahasuerus, and he says there's these Jews who won't fall, they won't bow down to you. They won't bow down the way everybody else would. They have their own laws and they don't listen to you. And the Ahasuerus said, okay, let's, we should, I agree with you, we should kill them all, let all over. And that was from India to Ethiopia, the 127 nations, as the book of Esther says. That's how big the empire was. Anyway, Mordechai then goes to his niece, whom he brought up, and says to her, Esther, you have to go and plead our case to the king, to Ahasuerus, her husband. And she said, I haven't seen him in 30 days. If I go, anybody who goes to his chamber where he is and says and comes in, who is not asked to come by the king, is killed. Mordechai says to her, Esther, this is our people. If you don't go, you're going to die anyway. Maybe that is the reason that you have become queen. Maybe that's God's hand. Now, what's the point? The Israelis have done everything they can to avoid. They were like, Esther, oh my God, trying to take out Iran's nuclear program. From what an interview that Benjamin Netanyahu has done, and from a bunch of other military people that I know, at least one that you've had on your program, I asked directly, they're military people, and they know what they're talking about. And again, I'm not a military person. I said, can Israel take care of the Iranian nuclear program? Netanyahu said, yes. And the other former colonel in the British military, who knows the Israelis, who knows what he's talking about military, he's awesome. His answer was, yes. Now, maybe God, and who am I to know what's on God's mind? Maybe God put these lefties in power in Israel, who've been trying to make nice to the Democrats in Washington because they accuse Netanyahu of being, of going overboard to support Trump. And the same of Ron Dermer, the former Israeli ambassador to Washington. And it's not true, because they did everything they could to reach out to the Democrats. It's the Democrats who told them where to go. And that doesn't mean they're not good Democrats who support Israel in Congress and in the Senate. Anyway, the Israelis realize that they're pushed against the wall here. They're alone. They cannot rely on America. Look at America's track record, especially under the Biden administration. What did the Biden people do in Afghanistan? They abandoned none of the Afghans who work with them. They abandoned American citizens there. And smugly this isn't true. They're only 100. Well, they're still American citizens, and the American government is responsible for them. And we're constantly abandoning. And then America is very strongly, it wants to have, it said to Poland, no problem, you can give, you give your MiG airplanes to the Ukrainians who know how to use MiG planes. They were trained on them, and we'll backfill you with planes, American planes, to the Polish military. When the Poles said, well, we'll transfer them to the American military, the MiGs, the American military base, and then get them to, and then from there they can be sent to, or the Ukrainians can come and pick them up and bring them to Poland, to Ukraine. No. America calls this leading from behind. There's no such thing as leading from behind. That's a cop-out. And the other is America's not leading, America is following, but it's following the awful things that the people in the previously Obama administration and the people who simply don't love the values of our founding fathers. And that's what's wrong. And that's maybe why God has said, okay, up to you, the Israelis, the Jews, it's your turn. You're basically alone. Stand up like the Queen of Esther stood up. Save Israel. Save the Jewish people.
Amen.
I can't know what's on God's hand. That's Purim of today.
Absolutely. Harold, I just thank you so much for joining us today from Florida and taking up your precious time to give us that your wonderful insight into this horrendous new agreement that the Biden administration are about to announce on Iran's nuclear weapons program. And we pray that not only would Israel stand up and the Jewish people stand up to this evil, but also Christians throughout the world in solidarity with Israel and the Jewish people.
And I admire you and your work so much, Simon. I'm glad that you asked me to come on your program.
Always a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Harold.
Thank you.
Insightful interview there with Dr. Harold Rode. Thank you for that, Simon. We do have some emails and texts. Again, many thanks to each of you who've wished me and my wife well on the birth of our daughter. I appreciate your ongoing prayers. Anita says, Putin seems to be choosing his friends amongst the most dangerous regimes, China and Iran. Russia are pressing for Iran to get nuclear weapons. It's a sad state of affairs. Throw Syria into the mix as well. Can't forget they're involved there, and who knows where else as well. But there are quite a few comments also primarily focused on the Ukraine-Russia crisis. We're not talking about that this evening. Thank you for your email. We will, I'm sure, be coming back to that subject, but after a good while of dealing with that, we've decided to take a break and look behind the headlines that you're seeing on a daily basis regarding Russia and Ukraine, look at what's going on in the back scenes. And Simon, what's interesting here is that actually Russia is involved in this Iran deal.
Because the Iranians won't negotiate with the Americans, so the Americans have entrusted the Russians to negotiate. And this is at a time before the Russians invaded the Ukraine, when they had something like 150,000 troops amassed on Ukraine's border. They were allowing the Russians to negotiate on their behalf to come to an agreement.
So we have this guy, the Russian ambassador, Mikhail Ulyanov, as Russian President Vladimir Putin was deploying his forces by tens of thousands to Russia's borders. He gave a particular statement, having been appointed by Mali. Ulyanov, heading Russia's delegation in Vienna, serves as one of two mediators between the American and Iranian delegations. Ulyanov's services were necessary because the Iranians refused to sit in a room solo with Americans. Ulyanov has, it's been said, essentially run these talks at Mali's behest. And as Ulyanov said last week, Iran got much more than it could expect, much more.
But looking at the naivety, I mean, Melanie Phillips has written an excellent article that Reagan quoted from earlier in the Times, in which she said that Iran is blazingly playing the West for suckers, malice against Israel. By Melanie. She said that the US Secretary of State's view is that war achieves absolutely nothing, and appropriate response to aggression is negotiation and compromise. Someone in the Biden administration said it's better a nuclear Iran than a military confrontation. They also say that if Iran is embraced by the world community, it would modify its terrorist ways. And there's also this empowering of the Iranian regime against Israel and the Gulf states, primarily because the Biden administration sees Israel and the Gulf states, possibly Saudi Arabia, as bringing in the United States into wars in the Middle East, which is actually not true, but that is how they deem the situation. And also the fact that what the consequences are of this nuclear deal. I mean, Iran will have instantly $90 billion in sanctions relief to spend on Predator drones to support Hezbollah, Hamas, to more wars, to support the rebel fighters in Yemen against the Gulf states and also against Saudi Arabia, continuing to prop up Assad's regime in Syria, plus their support for international terrorism, which will lead to greater conflicts and more wars in the region. And clearly Biden has learned nothing from Russia's invasion of the Ukraine.
Now, Britain is not completely out of this discussion, as today we heard some very good news, and that the abducted, essentially, Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe has been released, and I saw just a few moments ago she is currently en route flying back to join her family in the UK, and that's
great news.
It's great news. People have been praying for that and working towards that since 2016. At the same time, we have to consider some of what's going on behind it. And there's a £380 million debt that has been paid to Iran that has, in effect, secured her release. It's almost like some sort of ransom payment. And there's a lot of complications, Simon, to the source of that debt, but it goes all the way back to the late 70s when the Shah was still leading. The debt is technically not owed to Iran's current regime. It was owed to the Shah. It was received for about 1,800 tanks and other vehicles that doubtless the Shah would have deployed against the pending revolution, but he never received. So the UK has not held has held on to that cash and has not paid off that debt to Iran. Because of the amount that the Shah had paid, it did leave Iran short on reserves, which is why the current regime has been constantly bringing it up.
But that's a huge amount of money.
Massive.
And also,
Massive.
Not only that, is that it's the Islamic Republic of Iran declared war on the West. It declared war on the United States, declared war on Israel, declared war on us. So, make that of you will. But also the fact is that the sanctions were in place, which meant that Britain couldn't do that. So it very much seems that they found a loophole to actually reduce the sanctions against the regime. But of course, we in the dying minutes, we have to discuss very quickly that tonight is Purim, and the Jewish people in Israel and around the world, no doubt Rachel, she's up to it, be putting on a fancy costume and celebrating the defeat of Haman.
Rachel's in a fancy costume in hospital. She's in a hospital gown. Sorry, Rachel, if you're watching, I should. But I mean, it's an amazing thing. Read the Book of Esther, guys. Take some time over the next couple of days to read the Book of Esther. It took place where all of this is happening in modern day Iran, in Persia, and we saw how God delivered the Jewish people from total annihilation. They were the target of this ethnic cleansing attempt by this evil man, Haman, in Stamford Hill. If I'm able to make it there at some point tomorrow, I will partake in a sweet delicacy called Haman's ears that are made.
I see now. Yeah.
To commemorate the occasion. You should try it.
And you go to a synagogue, and in the synagogue, if the name Haman is mentioned, there's always booze and hissing.
It's like a pantomime.
Yeah.
And there's fancy dress. It's good fun. It's great fun, even in the most orthodox communities. It's amazing.
But it has a very powerful message today, because today the Islamic Republic of Iran has declared its ultimate goal is to destroy the nation of Israel. And again, that is genocide, that is annihilation. And, as Christians, we need to speak up against this Iranian threat, because we know that Israel is the apple of God's eye, and he comes against Israel, God will come against them. And of course, then it's all the curses linked to Genesis 12, 1-3. I will bless those who bless you, I will curse those who curse you.
God will not allow his people to be destroyed. So we pray against that. We know and should condemn that reprehensible plot, but God will not allow that to happen. We submit it to him. Iran will face his justice.
Absolutely. So, Reagan, it's great to be joining you on Behind Headlines, and congratulations on the birth of Ariel. Absolutely, it was wonderful news. And we just want to thank you for watching tonight's program. If we've learnt nothing, it's to remember that we have to learn the lessons from history. We haven't even learnt the lessons from Russia's war against Ukraine. So we need to stand up to the Iranian threat and not allow this regime to have nuclear weapons. So thank you for watching tonight's Behind the Headlines.